there's a balancing act here. What is the news value of this story to remain on the site untouched, right? Versus the reputational damage that it would be doing to an individual. Okay, and that's what we're trying to sort of figure out, and we've sort of, as I said, set out some standards that we're going to apply to the cases as they come in.
I'm Justin Silverman of the New England First Amendment Coalition. The following presentation is part of our First Amendment and Free Press program, where we take a look at newsrooms throughout the region and the work of our local journalists. Many newsrooms in our region and across the country are now dealing with questions about how to reevaluate the newsworthiness of old stories, particularly when it's weighed against the reputational harm that's occurring through their publication. These are important questions that these newsrooms are wrestling with that bring up concepts of freedom of information and news coverage and how to best cover crime in our communities. They're difficult questions, and questions that the Boston Globe has recently begun asking through its Fresh Start initiative. This is a program that David Dahl, an editor at the Globe, recently met with our board of directors to discuss. What you're about to see is an edited version of that conversation where David addresses some of the more common questions about these types of programs and the Fresh Start initiative specifically.
We started with a basic question. Should a single mistake define you for the rest of your life? That was sort of the central question around what we call the Fresh Start initiative. The idea here being that stories live on for a long, long time nowadays because of the search engines that we are all familiar with, because of the digital world that we're existing in. In the past, a police story or some other story might appear in the back of the local section. And that would be that. And it would appear, you'd see it in your daily paper, and it would get thrown out into the garbage. And the only way somebody would be able to find it again would be probably if they either clipped it out or if they went through the archives at the library or sought to go through our archives in our library. And we know that stories about police items can be kind of random. It can depend on what else is going on that day or that night. It can depend on how aggressive the reporter is that particular day. And so that can often dictate this type of stuff that gets published. So that adds sort of another variable into this equation about what actually gets published in terms of police coverage. We kept that in mind as we sort of plunged into this. It must be maybe 6 months or so ago. Our concern was the person who, the generic person who, like I said, is basically seen their life ruined because of a past police story or embarrassing incident that was covered by us. And when that person's name is searched for in Google, that's the first thing that comes up. Is that affecting their job prospects, their personal lives, or just simply their reputation? We started about 6 months or so ago. There was probably 8 or 10 of us. We talked to community leaders, we talked to lawyers, we talked to criminal justice advocates. We read quite a bit about crimes that were considered to be less serious than others. We also talked to other organizations that have already done this. The Cleveland Plain Dealer, one of the New Jersey papers, or maybe newjersey.com, I can't remember, the Tampa Bay Times. All 3 of those have done versions of this over the last several years. We wanted to sort of get a sense of what their approach was. We also wanted to get a sense of, frankly, how many people would be coming to us and asking for some remediation to past coverage. We looked at, like I said, looked at sort of different levels of crimes, and we came up with some criteria about what type of cases we would consider for some sort of action. And we said, well, people in positions of trust, people in prominent professional situations, i.e. teachers, public officials, that sort of thing, would probably not we would have a much higher bar in our decision to sort of take some action, like taking a story down or something like that. But somebody who, like I said, has been only written about once in some random kind of goofy police item, those stories we would consider more seriously. We also talked about what sort of actions we would take. This kind of gets morphed into, can you take that story down? Which is a really simplistic way of going about this. That's not what we're likely to do whatsoever. There's 2 or 3 general ideas that we would do, or things that we would do. One would be, could we go back into the story? Let's say an individual got into a bar fight, this story has sort of been hanging around him or her for the last 5 years. Every time they Google their name and that comes up. We never went back and covered the court hearing that found that the case was dropped, or after they did probation, the case was dropped or something like that, but that's what happened. What would we do in that situation? Well, if that person is not a person of prominence in a position of trust in our society, if there's no evidence that he or she sort of did a whole bunch of other bad stuff, we would either probably put a note at the bottom of that item that said, a judge later dropped this charge on April 27th in 2015, or that person was found not guilty or something like that. And then we would leave the story up on our site, in our system. It would still be findable, but there would be an editor's note at the bottom that said that this is no longer, this charge is dropped. Okay, so that's one option. Another option might be that we would de-index it, meaning that it could not be found easily in Google search. It would still exist, it would still be live, it would still be out there, but it wouldn't be easily found by Google, okay? Those are sort of the more likely scenarios. So the scenario of sort of taking something down, i.e. taking it off our site, is quite an unusual step for us to take. Jason Toohey, our managing editor for digital, would know this off the top of his head, but I can't imagine that we've done this more than 5 times in the last several years, okay? It's just not very common, and it's unlikely that we would do it again. I should say that we have been approached by subjects and stories off and on for years with this very request, and we've sort of have handled them on a case-by-case basis. This Fresh Start initiative is meant to kind of try to standardize it a little bit, and also tell people about it. So that's the next component here is what we would do to let people know about it. We did a story. We've done some outreach. We've talked to the people who we talked in the formulation of that. We're in the process now of continuing to reach out to people. And the intent, we have a site on the website. The way this is supposed to work, the way this does work, is the individual contacts us, tells us their situation in an online form. Ideally, if they have it, sends us a document that would show, to use that bar fight example, that the case was dropped, and any other extenuating circumstances, sends us an email or or gives us their email address or telephone number so we can contact them with any sort of feedback. Then we take that case and we distribute them out to a committee of, I think, 8 or 10 folks in the newsroom. Each of us are supposed to do 4 or 5 individual cases, and we do a little backgrounding. We try to find out through our rather difficult public records system here in this great state of Massachusetts, whether this individual has had a bunch of other charges or something like that, if they're a repeat offender in some way. And then we will meet as a group with our recommendations from the individual subgroups and go through the cases. I says we will. We haven't gotten to that stage yet. We each have 4 or 5 cases. I've gone through my batch. Jason and I haven't talked about them yet. And then we'll probably meet as a group. We plan to meet like once a month or so. And we're keeping kind of track to look for patterns, to see what we're looking at, and to generally start to figure out a standard here. We've articulated a standard along the lines of what I described here to you, but we're open to changing it or understanding more about how we're going about this as we go through it. Serious crimes are probably not going to clear the bar for us, even if it's a one-time only manslaughter charge. That's probably not going to clear the bar for us, or at least it would get a much tighter scrutiny bias. So the intent here is this was born of a larger look within the globe about how we cover crime, how we are perceived in the community, how we cover all communities. Frankly, out of the George Floyd reckoning, our belief would be that our crime coverage is sort of inherently random in a lot of ways, as I described before, and that perhaps in part because of the way the police departments have covered communities of color or other factors, our coverage might not be as fair as it could be. And so that individuals, people of color who would have been named in our stories, might have this hanging over their heads for a long time, and we want to kind of remedy that. There's a balancing act here. What is the news value of this story to remain on the site untouched, right, versus the reputational damage that it would be doing to an individual? Okay, and that's what we're trying to sort of figure out, and we've sort of, as I said, set out some standards that we're going to apply to the cases as they come in. So being a standards kind of guy, I started out with this idea that we were gonna firmly say that every misdemeanor was gonna be automatically wiped off the books whenever we were asked to do that. And that, I actually sort of suggested that we do a series of if-then questions and actions. And that's too rigid. We came around to the idea that we shouldn't be boxing ourselves in, that these cases should be considered on an individual basis. But we did start to think about and talk about and actually articulate in our public comments and our descriptions online some factors that we will consider. Were the charges dismissed? Was there a conviction? How severe was the crime? Was this an isolated incident or part of a larger pattern? Does the news value of the story, as it currently outweigh the harm being done on the individual? So we're going to review all the cases that come in, but we're not going to act on every single one in terms of taking action to de-index it or alter it in some way. Only in extreme cases are we going to actually consider removing the story entirely from the website. And all these decisions are going to be made by us in the newsroom. One of the reasons we spent so much time putting this together was we wanted to sort of talk to others that have done this. And the estimates we got from those three news orgs that I talked about, Cleveland, New Jersey, and Tampa Bay, was, somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 cases a month, maybe 50 cases at the most. Um, um, we've gotten, I think we had some that we sort of steered in there because they were pending requests before we set this up. And we're in that ballpark at this point. We're trying to outsource the first steps of this. So in the query that we put out to the public, and we have them sort of sign in, we have them send us their stuff if they've got a court document, if it's a criminal case, or a lawsuit of some sort, they would submit that as part of their material. We would consider expungement or sealing to be pretty strong criteria in taking some sort of action. We are trying to be careful in saying we're not taking something down, okay? Because again, that sets an expectation that story is going to be no more. It's never going to live on our site, and that is the most extreme step that we would take in very rare situations. So that's one thing. The other thing is it sounds like they might be in the situation that maybe we were without intent prior to this program. We weren't reluctant to publicize it. We just wanted to make sure we had some standards. I don't know what the specific was on the rare case in which we actually took something down. I suppose if it was egregiously wrong, reputationally damaging, and that sort of thing, that would be something that we would consider would fall into that consideration. In terms of the middle ground of de-indexing, I mean, I guess we're going to go back to the reputational issue here, that even if that story were altered with a yes, but the charge was dropped, is there still a significant reputational damage that outweighs the news value of this particular item, this isolated incident that would in the print world would have appeared on page 6B, and in the digital world was one of several items that was posted 6 years ago, and it still lives on every time you search for this guy's name. Even if we added yes, but the charge was dropped by a judge, it's still stuck to this guy's name whenever his name is searched in Google. And so the reputation is still, the balancing act is still sort of there. One of the things that this is helping us with, and I think what I'm about to say was actually something that's been underway at the Boston Globe anyway for a while, which is causing us to think about what stories we cover in the first place. I think every news organization has to decide what they want to be covering. This process, as I said, has led us to think, as we were thinking hard about before it even started, what we should and should not be covering in the crime area. If Joe Schmo got removed or de-indexed, and then Joe Schmo ran for city council, we would be able to find that internally. I believe that is right. I know that's true of the print archives, and I believe that's true of the online archives internally. Because we're collecting this information from the public and using it to sort of figure out trends, we're keeping a database. And in that database, I hope to sort of extract sort of some trends for our own internal use. And I would imagine that we will talk about that publicly, if not do a story about it. Our intention is good, I believe, is meant to address inequities in the criminal justice system, frankly, and in our society, and in the way people of color have been treated over the years. That led us to this policy that I think is sort of going to be broader than that eventually, or is. But we spent several months thinking about it and working on it and talking to a lot of people in the community, and we're open to suggestions.